Glad you're here. It's nice to see such a strong showing for this wonderful conversation we're about to have. My name is Ryan Honey. I'm the Executive Director of TACAW. I want to thank you all for coming out this evening and joining us. If you're just coming in, there's lots of seats over here on this side, so come on through. Really excited about tonight's conversation, and I have to give a quick thank you to Michael Lipkin and Jody Goralnik, who underwrote tonight's event and made this possible. Thank you, Jody. And there's Michael right there. Thank you, Michael. I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to talk about Michael and his vision and why we're here. Willits would not be here if Michael had not done what he had done. TACAW would not be here if Michael didn't have the vision to set aside this parcel as an arts parcel. He is a great supporter of ours and very generous with ours, but also still a visionary to this day, and has some big ideas of what we could do in this valley around transforming our community to be less reliant on cars and have a higher quality of life. We have a pretty good quality of life, let's admit it, but always thinking outside the box about what we could do next. So please give it up for Michael for supporting us and for putting this together. Yeah. Couple things. We will have a Q&A following this. There'll be 2 mics that will be passed around. We ask everyone during the Q&A to keep your conversations on topic and brief, and then hand the mic back to the runner so we can get through as many of those as we can. And we will gather in the lobby after the Q&A as well for further conversation about this important topic. So one of my favorite parts of this job is getting to introduce people who are a lot smarter than I am, and tonight is one of those cases. So we're going to begin tonight with the CEO of Culdesac. They build carless communities around the world. So please welcome to the stage Ryan Johnson.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I have a radical idea that we can build attainable housing with great community and less traffic. This shouldn't be a radical idea in this country, and it's possible. In fact, it's the right thing to do for the Roaring Fork Valley. I'm Ryan Johnson, the CEO and co-founder of Culdesac. We build walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods that embrace a culture of belonging, transportation freedom, and thriving local businesses. And it's great to be here in Willits. What you've built here is quite impressive. And it shows what's possible when you focus on building places people love to be in. And it's the reason that I'm here today. And yesterday when I arrived, I was inspired by couples walking through the linear park and neighbors hanging on their front porch and kids playing a block from their home. And many of you biked or walked here today. Something magical happens when we get out of our cars and into our communities. Before we get too far, there's one slide in here that is my favorite slide, and see if you can guess what it is, and I'll point it out when we get there. Culdesac built the first car-free community built from scratch in the US, in Tempe, Arizona. But it's not about being anti-car, it's anti-car dependency. It's about unlocking something so much better with vibrant neighborhoods and a lower cost of living with less added traffic than what we've been building in the US for the past 100 years. And before we go farther, I want to tell you about my story and how we arrived here today. Personally, I've been car-free for 15 years, so I walk the walk every day. Really, I use a portfolio of transportation options, from rail to buses, Lyft, Waymo, electric scooters, and yes, e-bikes. The New Yorker called me the Jay Leno of e-bikes, so if you're in the market, let's talk. It didn't happen overnight, and it goes back to 23 years ago on a trip to Budapest with a scholarship group as an undergrad, and I probably could have used a haircut. Where there was great transportation and great street life, and that meant that people were happier and healthier, and that inspired me that the US should be building more like that. I didn't know the word for it at the time, but I loved how it felt. You could walk everywhere without needing a car. There were people laughing in plazas, there were retailers that knew people's names, and there was a sense of spontaneity and lots of energy. But more than that, it felt deeply human. And that unlocked a passion for cities for me. And I sought out opportunities to study and work and live abroad. And I went to 60 countries and lived in a handful and saw lots of inspiration, the best pieces of which we try to bring to Culdesac today. I was soon studying abroad in Santiago, Chile, and even interning for the UN. And I studied the bus system, and that's when I fell in love with bus rapid transit. And by the way, what stuck out to me here in the Roaring Fork Valley is that you have a great BRT system, and we'll talk more about that later. I spent a decade working in transportation with trains and helicopters and buses, including for the New York MTA. And I worked at the World Bank, and I found myself in South Africa, and this was the last car I owned. It was called a Ford Ka. And I don't know how I fit in that thing, or drove it. It was a stick shift, and you drove on the left side of the road. But I sold it in 2010 and moved back to the US, and didn't feel that I needed a car. And that was because this was right when Lyft and Uber were taking off. We were entering an era of great technological change that would make transportation more flexible, accessible, and just better. And later, we'll hear more from John Zimmer, the co-founder of Lyft, if his company didn't exist, Culdesac would not be possible. With the rise of e-bikes, scooters, and autonomous vehicles, the way people get around was evolving fast, but real estate wasn't. Transportation changes more quickly. Real estate changes slowly. And building for cars is outdated. I saw how real estate was changing when I joined the founding team of Opendoor, a real estate technology company. And Opendoor has some of the best data in real estate. And one thing really stuck out to me, that the places that were designed before cars were more desirable. And unfortunately, had become unattainably priced. When I talked to countless customers, and the word that I would hear the most often is that they wanted a place that was cute. And I asked them what that meant. And they said that that was a place where they would know their neighbors, and there might be a coffee shop or a place where they could stroll to dinner, and it had a sense of community and thoughtful architecture. Kids could play safely outside. And it clicked that what they wanted was something walkable. And that word's now in the zeitgeist, so now you hear more people saying that they want to live somewhere walkable. And in fact, the National Association of Realtors, they now do a survey, and they found that the majority of every generation would prefer to live in a walkable neighborhood, even if it meant paying more, including 92% of Gen Z. Millions of Americans want this lifestyle, but far too few get it, and it's because we're not building enough, because of outdated zoning laws that have made it effectively illegal to build this way, and parking minimums. Let's talk a little bit about these. We're in a vicious cycle here in the US where when you build something, you have to add parking, and that leads to space that could have gone to people to be used for cars. And that means that people feel like they have to get a car to be able to get around. And we mistake that as what they want when actually they didn't have a choice. And we underinvest in alternative transportation modes that are so important. And we have this mass auto-centric culture that then gets enshrined in parking minimums. So this is the cycle that exists today and has dominated the built environment in the US for decades. But it's possible to reverse this cycle. The mission for Culdesac is to combine housing and transportation to build the next generation of walkable neighborhoods so that everyone has the opportunity to live in one. And when we started 7 years ago, people said it would never work, that we couldn't get the zoning, that it wouldn't work in the desert of Phoenix, and certainly not without cars. But we knew if we did it well, we'd be building not just a new type of real estate, but a new way of life, or really an old way. And despite that initial skepticism, here's where we are today. We've gone from a dirt lot where we wrote, "We love bikes" in 1,200-foot wide cornstarch, to a thriving neighborhood with 350 residents, 24 retailers, and 50-plus courtyards. Not a single drop of asphalt. Culdesac Tempe has become a role model for how to build walkable communities across the US in the 2020s. And now everyone who laughed at us wants to know how we did it and to work with us. Culdesac brings a new vision for neighborhoods and cities, one that replaces traffic with tranquility, car payments with community, and parking lots with plazas. We wanted to share the magic of connection, neighbors who know each other, and barbecues that lead to unexpected friendships. That's the America that people were and are still hungry for again. Living without a car in Phoenix is not only possible, but our residents have true transportation freedom thanks to a portfolio of transportation options. We partnered with mobility companies to give residents free and discounted access to light rail, buses, rideshare, e-bikes, and more. And we created the first mobility hub in the city of Tempe. The result is that residents live full, rich lives without needing to own a car. The future of transportation is about choice, not car dependency. And what struck me when I arrived here in the Roaring Fork Valley is you already get this. Yesterday, I hopped on a bus in Aspen, and I was dropped off right by my hotel, only a couple blocks from here in Taka. And the best part is I didn't even break a sweat. And that would not be the case in Phoenix right now. So I'm glad to be out of that. Also, my phone is blowing up because they said that the biggest storm in years just hit Phoenix. So everybody's checking on their backyard things. So I'm very glad to be here. People immediately ask about the grocery store when we talk about this. So let's get into it. There are three ways people get their groceries. There's a small market on site for daily needs. And our residents go to the same grocery store as everyone else using their preferred mode of transportation. Some people will use cargo storage on their bikes. Some people will use Lyft or the light rail. Others will use hourly car rental. It's about what they want to use. And also, a lot of our residents are power users of delivery services, such as I know that a lot of you have been using Whole Foods delivery. So our residents use those type of services, including from Whole Foods. I met someone I talked with somebody out there who said that they had an 11-person dinner party and they got all of the groceries from that with one bike ride. So it's already happening here. And our resident stories tell it best. So I live in Culdesac, and one of my neighbors says that they've made more connections living at Culdesac for 6 months than in 15 years living in the suburbs on a cul-de-sac. More connections in 6 months than 15 years. That resident also had the first cul-de-sac baby, and other residents got them a meal train. And that's the kind of community that we're building. This is Electra, who's vision impaired. And she says that cul-de-sac is the first time she lives somewhere that feels like it was designed for her. And for the millions of Americans who can't drive, this feels like reclaiming their independence. One of my favorite success stories is So Used, a vintage clothing shop. On the left, you can see where they started, in a pop-up table at our night market. And when that went well, they signed a 1-year lease in one of our live workspaces. It was their first brick and mortar store. And when that went well, they signed a full commercial lease in a bigger space. And that's going really well now. And by the way, if any of you still have your clothes from the 70s or 80s, they will buy it from you. At Culdesac, we now have 24 neighborhood businesses. Many of these wouldn't exist without the ladder we've built from pop-ups to live work spots to full leases. This is homegrown retail owned by your neighbors. Communities are built around small business owners, and there's nothing more impactful. It's also about everyday needs. For us, that's a Korean market where neighbors stop in after school. Every place needs its after-school hangout spot. Collaboration with local government is key. And none of this can happen without governments in the Roaring Fork Valley. Builders can't do it alone. Things like the Velociraptor are a great example of how governments can work to make cities better, and even more is possible. Talk a little bit about what we do in Tempe. We partnered with the city council to have the first agreement between a developer and a city to build without residential parking. And we also work with them on their economic development priorities. They had a strip mall with one last tenant. They wanted to redevelop it. And we found them a home at Culdesac, and that's where I got my haircut this weekend. It was a barber. And also, we worked with the city to get a federal grant that paid for a protected bike lane that opened this year. And Tempe found out, just like other cities have, that when they make good bike infrastructure, they find out that they had more bikers all along. People love Culdesac Tempe because it flips the script. Landscaped plazas instead of unsafe streets. The majority of neighbors meeting up monthly instead of shutting the garage door. And 24 local businesses instead of needing to travel 10 minutes to get a coffee. Cars are antisocial, and getting out of a car is where life actually happens. And it might seem like the elephant in the room is that Phoenix and the Roaring Fork Valley are a little bit different. But the great news is that it works here too. And in fact, some things are better. For example, you have e-bikes that will be going up the ski slope with skis, because when you have a mode that can go faster and you can blast past gridlocked traffic, lots of people will use it. Instead of being locked into a private car, people can choose the best mode for each trip. You might walk to school, take an e-bike to the grocery store, use bike share to get to the gym, hop on BRT to work, take ride hail for the last mile. You can mix and match. You can take bike share to a restaurant, and if it starts raining, you can take Lyft home. And yes, sometimes a car is the best option. That's why hourly car rental plays a role for things like weekend trips. And many of these modes are changing quickly because of changes in technology. And that's why now is the right time to rethink how we build cities. Let's dive into 3 of these. Let's talk about e-bikes. There's lots of mountain bikers here. You're much better than me. But for commuting, e-bikes are a game changer. Adding an electric motor means a step change in access. You can have 40 times as much area as walking. And it's much easier for a place to be bikeable than walkable because there's 40 times as many things to do. And e-bikes are useful so that more people can go from 2 cars to 1 car, or 1 car to 0 cars. How many of you have tried a Waymo? We've got quite a few. It's like a Lyft, Uber, or taxi, but the car drives itself. We call that AV ride hail. And at first it feels strange, but within minutes it's normal. And in Phoenix, we've had these Jaguars since 2023. I consider the Jaguars the real launch of Waymo. They're now as common as a Lyft or Uber. And after decades of testing, the technology is ready. And like landlines to cell phones, adoption happens slowly at first and then all at once. They're now operating or testing in 20+ cities, including multiple with snowy, cold weather. For the Roaring Fork Valley, it's not if, but when. And when AV ride hail is available, it changes everything. Today, when you need a car, you either pay for a private car or you pay for ride hail with a driver. When the car drives itself, this equation flips. AV ride hail becomes cheaper than owning a car, enabling many millions to go car-free. And that is great news. Waymos are involved in 92% fewer pedestrian crashes, and this creates real safety that's so important. Unlike distracted drivers, Waymo is constantly improving. In Phoenix, in fact, bikers have become one of the biggest advocates for Waymo because they'd rather ride next to a car with eyes around 360 degrees. 360-degree vision is also helpful for seeing wildlife. And parents even tell us they feel comfortable sending their kids to soccer practice. And I've never seen more effusive praise for a product than parents who say they have their freedom back now, that they don't have to be a chauffeur. So you might be wondering, even if everyone sells their car and uses AV ride-hail, won't there be the same number of cars on the road? And the answer, as we've proven at Culdesac, is no. At Culdesac, we already have Waymo, and yet the #1 most used transportation option is transit. When you get rid of the fixed cost of a private car and lock people into taking a car for every trip, people can choose the best mode for each trip. And sometimes they're looking to beat congestion with transit. Other times they want to enjoy a bike ride to the grocery store. For the right trips, they use AV ride-hail to carpool or as a last-mile solution from the BRT. And so this is not about going from a transition from private cars to using Waymo. This is about transition from private cars to a portfolio of transportation options. And for transportation, technology can be very lo-fi. The humble bus lane is the best technology we know of to fight traffic congestion. When transit goes faster than cars, it does the heavy lifting to reduce, not exacerbate, traffic. And by the way, I also love the branding here with Velociraptor. It's good to have a bus system using branding as aggressive as the car company branding. This is my favorite slide. The Valley is a transit planner's dream. About 77% of the Valley already lives and works along one corridor. And that geography makes this perfect for bus rapid transit. When the bus is faster than driving, people use it, and that gets cars off the road. It's a flywheel effect, and everybody's happier. Reimagining transportation is especially important in the Roaring Fork Valley. We're not just in a housing crisis, we're in an affordability crisis. And when we talk about affordability, it's important to think not just about housing costs, but also about transportation costs. Those two buckets alone are the majority of household spend. And in the Roaring Fork Valley, unfortunately, both are an issue. And walkable housing moves the needle on both. It adds attainable housing, and reduced car dependency lowers transportation costs. Based on what we've seen at Culdesac, residents save $10,000 a year just on transportation. And that's $10,000 that can be spent on childcare, a college education, a vacation, or more e-bikes. Getting from car dependency to transportation freedom might seem hard, but it's easier than it looks. The transit is already here. And housing designed for the future of transportation, add housing designed for the future of transportation, and suddenly the choice isn't difficult, it's natural. We don't have to go car-free overnight. We can build housing that allows for a car-free future tomorrow. Parking can start as parking and later become something better as each person and family is ready to go car-free. In these plans, what was once a parking space transforms into a landscaped courtyard. And as more cities make that shift, from car space to people space, cities become more beautiful, sustainable, and livable. It's so wonderful to be sharing this with you today. It feels full circle. When we were starting Culdesac Tempe, one of my first conversations was with Michael Lipkin about his vision for Willits. And today we're in probably the best part of that, Taka. Willits shows that it's possible to build something from scratch that's intentionally designed to center on the human experience. And that's why I see it as a shining example of what's possible. If you take one thing away from this, it's that you can get attainable housing, great community, and reduced traffic. At Culdesac Tempe, we've proven what's possible. Residents are living connected lives without the cost and stress of car dependency. And if we can do it in the desert, we can do it here in the Roaring Fork Valley, in Colorado, and across the country. We can reconnect with how we used to build before cars and create more communities that future generations will thank us for. Because the best neighborhoods in America are still ahead of us. Thank you. Is this one on? Hello? Okay, so now we're going to go sit over here. So we're going to jump into a discussion about the future of transportation, real estate, and the Roaring Fork Valley. And for that, I want to introduce my friend John Zimmer. John is, you got your microphone? John is the co-founder and former president of Lyft, which is one of the most important companies for transportation innovation. His first ride-hail venture was Zimride, which allowed college students to share rides home at the end of the semester. And eventually that led to Lyft. And John led Lyft to be the first major ride-hail company to IPO. And today it's a multi-billion-dollar company serving hundreds of cities. John, super excited to pick your brain, ask a few questions, and then we'll get some questions about the audience. So, hello.
Howdy.
So first, why did you start Lyft?
So I went to school in upstate New York at Cornell, and I had a city planning class. I actually studied hospitality. I went to hotel school. But I had a city planning class that inspired me. I had this amazing professor. His first lecture is the history of the world in 30 minutes, which is pretty intense. But if you know the book Guns, Germs, and Steel, it was very similar to that, very high-level themes that made you understand and appreciate patterns in how civilizations were built. And his 8th lecture, I think, was on transportation history. And he does this amazing thing about zooming out. And he had these 4 slides, or 3 slides, that was canal infrastructure, an overhead view, railroad infrastructure, and highway infrastructure. And to me, it was just these lines on a slide. And as he was lecturing, and he was like, he loved canals. And he just romanticized this system, but also talked about how impactful transportation has been throughout our history to how we live. Goods traveled along the canals, people moved because of the canals, industries were created because of the canals. And then in my head, I'm like, well, 100 years later, when they were building the canals, nobody thought, oh, no one's going to care about this in 100 years. And then I thought about, well, what's next? When I'm looking at that slide of the highways, I said, well, what's going to be that next slide in his presentation? And that was kind of the spark for what originally became Lyft, but it was all around city planning and how do we design cities for people and not cars.
And what led you to want to get involved with Culdesac?
Well, I mean, it's the same kind of thing, is that I never was, I'm very mission-oriented, and so the Lyft mission originally was reconnect people in communities. So I never approached the problem or the opportunity in transportation as the thing I wanted to do. I really wanted to unlock what you're doing. And so, as you know, our original CMO met you and then had to introduce us, and then I said, if I wasn't working on Lyft, I'd be working with you. I think, as we look at everything that's happening in the world and in America, I genuinely think this is the most important thing, is figuring out how do we design our cities. Because we all take for granted the designs that not all of us have either the time or input on how cities are designed. We just live in them. But it affects us so much, and it's so important. And so when I learned what you were doing, and even I think you remembered your tagline was cities for people, not cars, I knew that I had to find a way to work with you.
That was a pinch me moment for me. I think I was trying to play it cool and say, oh, okay, I'll talk to the others and get back to you. But I was very, very excited because John was such an inspiration, and Lyft was such a key part of pushing forward things to put in the final pieces that people can go car-free. So John, what do you think about parking minimums?
I think they're stupid. And that's, I guess, my personal belief. I very much agree with that dangerous cycle. I remember when I was getting into transportation, and in the early days of Lyft, there's someone Donald Shoup, I think his name is. I think he's a UC Davis or UCLA professor he's the world's expert on parking. And I mean, I ended up, again, I wasn't into transportation, I was into hospitality. I ended up at parking conferences and reading books about parking. And this professor, Donald Shoup, just laid it out and his book's called The High Cost of Free Parking. And that's basically the concept, is that we have this free parking and it ends up creating all these, makes it easier, but then you get more roads, and then you get more cars, then you get more parking, and it's this bad cycle. So I think it's bad. And I think, everything, whether how we design our cities or this law, we should think about the consequences and how it's good or bad for people. Now, there are real needs for parking if people have jobs and need to get around, can't afford a Lyft, in places where transit doesn't exist. So there's chicken or egg problems sometimes, but I know you wanted me to tell my personal story.
I love this one.
I'm not going to tell you where I live because I don't want to get in trouble, but there's a parking minimum that I'm required to be able to park at least one car at my house. But after the inspection, I dug up the driveway and I put grass. And the garage that was there is now where my in-laws stay, which is, we call the casita. So I don't like parking minimums, and I think there are many situations where we can build better cities without them.
I love that story. Let's talk about a place that was built before parking minimums were even a question. You studied abroad in Sevilla, and you recently spent a bunch of time there. Tell us about your reflections from there and what it can teach us.
Yeah, so I studied abroad in a while ago, something like 20 years ago, and I met my wife, and asking for directions. Had there been smartphones, I would not have asked her for directions. So met her, and after we hired a CEO at Lyft, and me and my co-founder took a step back, we decided to move the family for what was going to be 6 months, turned into 18 months to Sevilla. We just got back, and it was amazing. It was the first time, you and I are both obsessed with this idea of walkable cities and cities without car dependency, but it was the first time I actually really lived in that, in a city built pre-car. And I biked my kids to school every day. The parents kind of congregated and had coffee before school and beer after school because they didn't have to worry about pulling over and blocking traffic or parking. There was just everything you talked about, such a greater sense of community. And there's this kind of underlying amount of stress when you have to use your car. And add that to less interaction with humans. And I just felt happier and kind of more free. I think it was also because I wasn't running a public company anymore, but the lack of cars helped.
That helps. So I visited you. Tell me about the e-bike that you had there.
So it was a cargo. You're going to know how to describe it better than me, but it's a cargo e-bike. Is that how to? Yeah. They had a little carrier in the front, and so I have a 6 and 9-year-old daughter, and each of them could ride in there with their backpacks. It had electric assist, and I would zoom them off to school and back, and then if I did grocery shopping, I could use that. It was the best car I've ever had. Easy to park. It was fantastic.
And one thing that also struck me about Sevilla was how narrow some of the streets were. So if you talk about what you thought the right street width was before seeing that, and then after being there and seeing what it looked like. Yeah,
I don't know if I know I like diversity of architecture, and so I like the fact that there were some really more narrow streets. There's a lot of. It gets really, really hot in Sevilla. And so just thinking about what provides shade for people walking, I think is part of the original design. And then when either you're before car dependency or post car dependency, you really have to think about, how can we make this the most comfortable for people? But then there's some wider areas and plazas, which are, I think that's one of the things I miss the most about that design is the central plazas that are more lacking in most of America.
So what do you think are the two most destructive forces in our society?
The two most destructive forces?
Yeah.
Ooh. We didn't prep this one, so I'm going to have to think for a second. I think you're riffing off something I said earlier. Got it. I said earlier that the two most destructive things in my lifetime, I think, have been the automobile and the smartphone. And that's coming from someone who owns a car and a smartphone. So I'm not pretending like I don't. But we kind of like just accept, for the most part, these things that happen. And smartphone being one of them. And recently that I made a concerted effort to change. There's a company called Lightphone. I am an investor, as a caveat. But basically, it's a phone that doesn't have any social media, doesn't have any web browser, but you can call, you can text. It has various tools if you want to listen to music we're going to add Lyft soon. And so it has most of the needs that you want without getting sucked in. It's mostly black and white, but then when you touch the camera button, it turns to a color screen, which is really cool. And so I think those things have greatly impacted the sense of human connection and making us present in our daily lives. And so those are things I'm trying to both push in business or investment pursuits as well as in my personal life.
Absolutely. I'm doing great in the car. I need to work on the phone a bit more. Let's talk about AV ride hail. Tell us about how you've been thinking about that and where you think it's going.
Well, it's super exciting. I think like in the early days when I said, with Lyft, we want to enable people to build cities for people, not cars. I think literally I used the same words that you also use. And people were like, okay, John, like you're running Lyft. That's like a car company. And I think what we saw and is now starting to come true is obviously autonomous vehicles. And so, as I can't say certain things I'm blacked out from talking about on Lyft, but there's many autonomous partnerships that both Lyft and Uber will have. And I think ultimately, instead of, in the same way that you have a minutes plan or data plan on your phone, you'll have a miles plan with Lyft, hopefully. And you'll get maybe unlimited miles or maybe 10,000 miles a year, 12,000 miles a year, 1,000 miles a month, and you'll pay a service fee that is far lower than what you would pay to own a vehicle. You'll never have to worry about parking. You'll never have to worry about maintenance, cleaning, anything. You'll tap a button, insurance, it'll be baked in. You'll tap a button and you'll get from where you need to go way cheaper than what you're spending now on owning a car. So it's like the next big move in what ultimately enables what you and I are both obsessed with, and it's going to save people an incredible amount of money. The average American household spends, maybe you had it up there, but it was like $9,000 a year owning and operating a car. We spend more money on that than anything except housing. It's crazy. And so, if a candidate for president said, hey, I'm going to give you, let's say they get half of that back. I'm going to give every American $5,000 a year back. That would be a pretty powerful statement, and I think that's possible with autonomous vehicles.
So some people look at autonomous vehicles where they're operating today. It's for customers is mostly the warm weather places. We know they're operating or testing in 20 markets. Talk a bit about, folks here are thinking, hey, the Roaring Fork Valley, there's snow, it's very cold. Can AVs work here?
Yeah, it is just a matter of time for the technology to be much safer than the human driver. And the transportation for residents will be much cheaper than owning a vehicle. And so, I've been wrong on the timing, my timing predictions, but, where you live and in San Francisco, you can use it now all the time. Obviously, snow is different, but it's a few years away.
So let's do some audience Q&A, and Ryan, should I be asking the questions, or do we have a microphone out there? We got mics. All right. I can barely see people, so Ryan, could you call on people?
Hello, thanks for coming. I completely agree with all of your slides and been talking about it with my friends for the last several years, but we are a rural valley, right? There's anywhere from 5, 10, 20 miles that separate our little towns that seem like big cities, right? But at certain times of the year, there are 100,000 people for a week that visit Aspen, Basalt, Glenwood, Carbondale. Do you have any case studies or examples of something like this working or partially working in a rural subdivision or, valley as we are?
So for that, we would look across the world, including to the places that were built before cars. Obviously, there's a lot more in Europe just because of how history played out, where there are all kinds of rural, small towns that are wonderful villages, the kind of place where we film movies. It's a little bit sad that so many Americans will go to these places and love them and feel like, oh, this is where we go on vacation, rather than this is how we can live every day. So that's one of the big examples. In terms of the US, Culdesac was the first company to do this. And part of what made it so hard was that when in real estate, everybody asks questions about where it's been done before. It's a very slow-moving thing. Cities ask, where has this been done before? Investors ask, where has this been done before? Customers ask. And a big reason why we did this was to show that it can be done, because now it's the reference project. So now when other developers, including ourselves, are going to other places, we say, look what we did at Culdesac Tempe. It can work. And then the neighbors love it. And so part of what we're doing is showing that it can work in different places.
And I think as you talked about in the slides, like having a few steps, it doesn't have to be, let's get there tomorrow, instantly, but having a few steps, like having, you have, the Zipcar equivalent car sharing cars available, so that if you really need to go somewhere, there is a vehicle that you can, tap your phone or a card and take. And then as autonomous vehicles come, it will unlock more of these possibilities. As more investment is made in local transit, it will unlock more. But I think part of it is just you gotta go for it, and then build some of that portfolio of options to make sure it works for everybody.
I think they're running the mics.
Hi, I'm over here. I'm Michael Thompson. And I just wanted to express kind of where we're at right now in the Roaring Fork Valley. I've been here for a long time, and we've been, I think for 30 years now, we've had the paved Rio Grande Trail from Aspen to Glenwood. And so that's a bike path, and I'm a very heavy user of that bike path. Like you, Ryan, I'm car-free myself just for 8 years. But so that path is my highway, and I have to say your slides showed a lot of buses from Europe, but I didn't see any bike racks on them. So I just wanted to explain part of where we are now came from back in the 80s. An old friend of mine who was a bus driver, his name was Greg Hall, asked the Rafta board, can we put one of these little hoop bike racks on the bumper on the front of the bus? And all of his bike friends, and myself included, were like, okay, what's your schedule? We want to put our bike on, ride to Aspen, and then ride all over the place up here, and then ride back. We didn't have the Rio Grande Trail then, but we had the bike racks. Then they bought the Neoplan buses, the new buses, which didn't have bumpers. And so the mechanics at Rafta Bus Barn and the mechanics at Neoplan got together and designed a new bike rack that went on the front of those buses. Still, we were the only system in the state that had bike racks. And then I started seeing a company that made these hinged pull-up bike racks. I saw them first in Steamboat, then I saw them in Denver, then I saw them in Boulder, now I see them here. And lastly, I see them on the bus stang. So if you're in Aspen and you want to ride your bike or take the bus to Glenwood, you can put your bike on the bus stang and go to Grand Junction or to Denver. Once you're in Denver, you can ride all the bike paths around Denver up to Boulder, take a bus stang to Fort Collins, to Colorado Springs. So we pretty much have car-free, if you want it, statewide to a certain degree. And I just want to express my gratitude for that. I think it's great. And thanks for all that you're doing. I love it.
Thanks, Phil. Sounds like you've been a trailblazer here, and congrats on going car-free for so long. I appreciated hearing that history, and it's great to think about, as this gets easier, how many more people can do it. Who's got the mic?
Here, I can pass it down here. Thanks so much. My name is Sue Zislis. I'm here for Age-Friendly Carbondale. And because the fastest growing percentage of the population are folks over 60. And because a normal part of aging is some loss of balance gradually, some loss of inability to get down into a car, more difficulty walking from the bus to your home, and there's a lot of things that are part of even an agile, very functional, even an athletic senior citizen these days. Part of normal aging is a gradual loss of function and things a little bit harder day to day. And so this is a fabulous idea. Of course, we all love walkable communities, but what are we doing about accessibility? And when I say that, don't immediately jump to wheelchair users, because that's another whole thing. I'm talking about accessibility for people who are normally aging. How do we get from that bus to home? What do we do about the three parking spaces for a three-wheel bicycle?
Thanks for sharing your story. Yeah, this is a question that we get a lot, and accessibility is really important. On the one hand, there's the millions of Americans that can't drive, and this is adding options for them so that they feel like they're regaining their independence. Also, one way to think about it is any given trip can be replaced with a Waymo, and so in that sense, it's going to be strictly better, but this is a very important demographic and question.
Yeah, I think so. For instead of driving, you have an autonomous vehicle. I think there's going to be multiple forms of autonomous vehicles. Part of the vision at Lyft was that you would actually have certain vehicles for higher capacity than just kind of an individual or their family. And in those larger capacity vehicles, you would have people that were like the hosts that could come and help someone who needed help getting into the vehicle. So I think that once autonomous, right now, as you saw in the photos of Waymos, they're putting lasers and radars on top of existing vehicles that were made for regular driving with a steering wheel. But pretty soon we're going to get to autonomous vehicles, let's say over the next 10 years, that were designed to be without a steering wheel. And I think those will be built with accessibility at the forefront, and then on a larger capacity, you can have someone that can come out and help.
Multi-generational housing is a big part of what we do at Culdesac. We have a wide range of demographics, and one of the sad parts about how we build housing in the U.S. today is often that in different phases of life, it means moving to a different neighborhood, and so families can't live in the same places. And so when you build walkable neighborhoods, it means that more people can stay in the same neighborhood for a much wider set of their lives.
That was one of the most surprising things from living in Sevilla, is just the age diversity and the fact that people were walking everywhere, and I would say staying healthier because they were moving around more. Than my parents live in a over 65 community that is not walkable, and so anyway. Super important issue.
Speaking of housing, my name is Danielle. I'm a financial planner, and I'm with Habitat for Humanity. I'm on their board. You had a picture up there of a bunch of family homes, and then you had cul-de-sac that seemed like multifamily homes, and you're just speaking to that idea of intergenerational living and bringing people together. It seems to me we have to have a big paradigm shift, especially in this valley, about building wealth, because in this valley, a lot of wealth has been built by building bigger bigger houses and expansive single-family homes. So can you speak to how this plays out in the plan of whether it's more density? How do we start having conversations about true wealth is community, not necessarily just building a bigger home?
Yeah, you can come give the talking points. That was great. So what we do is when we build walkable housing, it builds more attainable housing that has a lot of benefits on its own, and having less car dependence saves substantial money. the residents at Culdesac are saving something like $10,000 per year, and that really allows them to spend that on what makes the most sense for them or save. And so we think that it's an important part of answering that challenge.
Also, I think another project that I think has inspired both of us is a friend who's in south of Georgia. It's called Serenbe, and they preserved 70%. Kind of slightly, another way of asking it, they looked at the green space, and they said, we want to preserve 70% of the green space, but encourage developers to come here. And they created a system that did that, and now on a kind of per square foot basis, they're making much more as a developer than they would in another place because it's so desirable. So I think if Culdesac and when Culdesac's able to build places that are more desirable, smaller footprint, then I think you can start to balance the best of both worlds. Because you do want to encourage developers, whether it's Culdesac or otherwise, that this is a exciting financially model for them as well as for community. And I do think younger and younger generations are going to be demanding that type of communal living.
Go ahead and do one more, Adair.
Oh, last one. Let's make it a good one.
I'm sorry. That's a lot of pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure.
I just want to know, Culdesac, what is the demographics? Who's moving in there?
So sometimes people think it might be one demographic. It's actually quite broad, and that reflects the demand for walkable neighborhoods where it's across all generations, and that's been wonderful to see. And we have so many people that visit. The number one thing that we hear from them is, can you build one of these near where we are? And so we think that this is appealing to, and we've heard that this is appealing to basically every demographic. It's a lot of people think that. So we're a mile and a half from ASU, and we actually have more ASU employees than students. So that's one aspect. But we have people of all age ranges, and that's our demographics.
I know there's lots of questions that everyone has, but we want to respect John and Ryan's time. We will gather in the lobby, and they may be able to mingle for a little bit longer to ask your questions. And we just so appreciate you guys coming here and
thanks for
being
having
a
us
part
out.
of this. So thanks. Give it up for them one more time.
Thank you.